Hello, leaders of the world. Welcome to Spread Love in Organizations, a podcast for purpose-driven healthcare leaders striving to make life better around the world by leading their teams with genuine care, servant leadership, and love. I'm Naji, your host for this special episode in partnership with MIT Sloan Healthcare and Bioinnovations Conference, an event that brings the healthcare ecosystem together. I'm joined today by Nate Beyor, Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group. Nate leads health tech for BCG, based out of Southern California. He is passionate about the interface between technology and biology, with a healthy appreciation for operational rigor. He has spent his career exploring different avenues at this intersection, from microfluidics to biologics manufacturing to stem cell therapy development, and now in digital health. At BCG, he has hands-on experience launching digital solutions, remote monitoring, clintech, supply chain, and precision medicine. Nate believes in the power of technology to change how we treat, how we heal, and how we live. Nate, I'm honored to have you with me today.
Nice to be here. Nice to talk to you, and good to see you since we first connected at MIT.
Yeah, good to see you again. Before we dig in digital innovation, specifically data, the topic of your panel at the healthcare conference, I'm really eager to hear your personal story. What brought you to the focus on healthcare in a consulting world?
You sort of led it with the preamble there, which I've generally always been intrigued and enthusiastic about places at the interface of different technologies. So for me, I came up more as like an engineering person. I studied applied physics in college, and then very later on in my undergrad career, got into biology as well. But they were very distinct. There was like biology classes, and then there were engineering classes, and there were a few that where there was a nice overlap. But I would say it was still very early days there, and I got really into kind of exploring that interface and going into grad school in bioengineering. And I went to the joint program between UC Berkeley and UCSF, ended up in a lab at Berkeley, though started at one at UCSF. That was a nice way to explore that interface. How do you get into consulting from there? I started doing some startup stuff along the way in grad school and realized that getting into top tier consulting was a way to get off the bench. And I never thought of myself as particularly capable on the bench. But again, really worked well in interdisciplinary environments where I could bring that technical lens and more of a business environment. Ended up in a role in consulting, thinking it would be short term, but ended up liking it a lot. And I have been in and out on sort of consulting and startup side over my career.
If we go into digital innovation, which was one of the topics you discussed in the panel, how do you define that, and what is included from your point of view in this large word of digital innovation?
That is a large word. So when I think about innovation, I think my favorite joke about this are, when you talk with companies that say, we want to be innovative, show us someone where you've been innovative before. We want to be innovative like them. And that's sort of like, by definition is not innovation anymore. It's repeating something that's already been done. So when I think about the word innovation, I think that it involves doing new things, taking on risk, bringing together multiple disciplines is really critical here. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to take a person that's totally from the consumer world and drop into a healthcare setting and expect magic to happen. But it is about being multidisciplinary so that I can take someone that, really understands what it means to have white glove, hands-on services that consumers expect and apply that within a healthcare setting, but they might work alongside someone that understands the underlying incentive structures between clinicians and payers in order to actually build something that's transformational. The other piece that is key in innovation, and I used the word intentionally in the last statement, is build. You have to do, not just talk about. And so we work with our clients to build solutions. I've been part of many software solutions that we put in the market, and we tend to push our clients to get hands-on as quickly as possible. One of my favorite examples, it's been my dream project for years, I'm running it right now, is a slide-free project, literally zero PowerPoint slides. There's only engineers on the team, and they're not allowed to make PowerPoint slides. They're only allowed to create actual working solutions. And, that I think for me is how we move the ball along a lot further. It's getting our hands dirty and building things.
I love it. You talked about having a diverse group working together and then prototyping and building actually solutions rather than talking about it. And this word digital that comes before innovation, how do you think of it? Right? In large organization, we can talk about digital from digital tech solutions that touches patients to just digitalizing whatever tools we were using commercially, for example, into now whatever software we have. How do you think of it when in the broad length of healthcare and digital innovation?
Yeah, I mean, you hit a good point of the simple version is how do I go to screens versus paper, especially in healthcare where there's just too much paper. But that doesn't get you a lot of value, right? Just going to a digital environment doesn't necessarily change the way you work. For me, the litmus test is more along the lines of how did I remove steps to get something done? So if I have a 10-step clinical workflow, if it's still 10 steps, but the 3 paper steps are now 3 screen steps, that doesn't actually add any value. It just changes where I'm looking or how I'm writing something down. I have to go from 10 steps to 6 steps to really get a fundamental change. And so I think we're getting there. And part of the enablement is due to better penetration of compute and storage, and further development of stronger analytics and algorithms. We're at this moment where we can see a lot of automation on the horizon and happening already in some cases. So you can start to see places where the automation can take out steps in a process, whether they are direct clinical processes in the background on the administrative side, or I work often in pharma services, for instance. You might see more kind of B2B things on clinical development or supply chain or manufacturing, where there's a lot of opportunity for automation. So back to the critical piece, it is really, digital is about changing the way you work through technology. It's not just adding in a technology component to something you already do.
So you touched about algorithm and different solutions for us to improve the process, actually, as you said, instead of just making it a screen. Behind this, obviously, there is data. So what is your take about data? Is it the new oil, as many would say? And how do you think of data with, obviously, in healthcare, we have a lot of this, many times never talking to one another as the, data rooms, etc. How do you think of this, and what is the type of structure do you think we need to strive for in healthcare?
Well, in health data, I think we've seen a lot of changes over the last few years. Even when I started at BCG coming on 6 years ago, the notion of integrating something within an EHR workflow was possible, but seemed so hard that nobody really wanted to deal with it. And a lot of solutions were actually stood up in kind of like a separate web environment that might force a clinician to go outside of their EHR. The interoperability is much more real right now, and people understand the need to integrate within the workflow and within the systems that are in front of clinicians. And that's just in a few years. And so I think what I'm excited about is from a data perspective, we are seeing a stronger infrastructure where these systems can talk to one another. Even back then, 5 years ago, it was harder to come by really scaled data sets, but you have a lot of claims data sets and associated solutions that are out there right now and easily accessible to drive analytics. I think we'll continue to see more and more of that. It's not necessarily a consolidation at the infrastructure layer, but more access and more connectivity at that infrastructure layer that will go, as I mentioned, we have claims, we'll get into clinical data. Increasingly, we're having more remote solutions, whether that's, your Apple Watch kicking off data or eCOA systems as part of a clinical trial. Those create other points of data creation and other types of data that we'll have to, connect to these systems. It will still be relatively fragmented. There's still a lot of different players out there creating solutions. There's a need for sort of a custom integration points through API or in other ways. but I'm excited that we go from one data set to the next, better connectivity, ways to map identification or to de-identify, and then more power on the compute side is feeding this automation like we talked about before.
So, as you were talking through it, I can't but think about GDPR in Europe. I had to implement it as a chief marketing officer at that time in those countries. What do you think about privacy? Privacy in the US is also kicking in. So I'd love your thoughts as all those interconnect. And obviously, we're going to be using those data to make better decisions for ourselves and probably for others. How do you think about privacy in all this setting?
It's a funny one because I remember building solutions and people would have this reaction like, oh, well, I have to be HIPAA compliant when I build over in this way, and so that's too burdensome. So I don't want to do that. Yeah, do it. But I always felt like it's a standard, and a standard is actually kind of nice because it's something specific you can build to. There are certainly sort of compliance associated aspects to it and regulatory ones that can be more burdensome and costly. For instance, how you might have to set up walled off data environments or even distinct legal entities in some cases, depending on the type of organization you are. But in general, I like that there's a standard, and I think the standard is appropriate. So it's a good thing. But we don't yet know the value of privacy at this point, which is interesting. I think there's this general fear of people finding out about my health data. For instance, I don't know what they're going to do with my health data when they find it. My employer who pays my insurance already has all that data and can, adjust premiums accordingly. So at the end of the day, I think we're still operating very cautiously. But I do like the standards. I think they're important. And we spend a lot of time worrying about this stuff. That engineering team I mentioned has been spending a lot of time thinking about how they operate compliantly, set up the right environments, scrub the data when needed in order to meet those standards.
So now that we talked about data standard and how to build to answer this compliant piece, you talked also about algorithm that will help us obviously make decisions either as healthcare providers or as individuals to make better decisions for our health. I'd love your thoughts on AI, which is obviously a hot topic these days, and ChatGPT everyone's talking about. And I remember during the conference there was this question about, do you think AI will replace individuals and specific some healthcare professions? What are your thoughts about this?
I think inevitably AI is going to be the less risky option versus humans in some circumstances. I think it's naive to assume that humans are going to be making all the same decisions that they are currently making. And we are going to have to adapt to AI-oriented solutions that are better at making those decisions. Now, are they generative? I don't know, but they might be a fixed algorithm in some cases. But certainly, just very simply, we talked about data. There's a lot of data getting produced. There's more data than any one clinician can handle in the 12 or 13 minutes that they see a patient. I'd rather have a computer looking at my data to make sense of it and at least triaging that and teeing up a range of insights that a clinician could then build upon versus completely relying on the human to do that analysis in their head. We're already doing this to some extent. So the question is how far you draw the line. That said, you do have to draw the line, right? If I think about it very simply in terms of like AI for radiology, ultimately, even in a triage environment, they're going to have to highlight certain images or highlight certain areas of images that could be of interest for a clinician to make a diagnosis. Depending on where they draw that line, which images to highlight or what areas, we are making an assumption around sort of statistical tolerance around that AI system. So there is some critical design questions and that we have both from a systems level and from a broader industry or society perspective in terms of how much tolerance we want to allow for these AI systems to have, and even when they are feeding humans to make the final decisions.
I love that. Certainly agree to it. And I think it gives also this power of a human connection at the end that only a human can do it, or a physician with a patient, but using the power of AI to get us closer to a diagnosis somehow.
Although, did you see all the stuff last week about this this study that showed that the generative AI system, I don't remember which one it was, if it was, I think it was GPT-4, but it outscored the humans in terms of empathy, in terms of the answers provided. I haven't read the study in detail. I've only seen the headlines and some lightweight analyses on it, so I can't claim to have a clear understanding of it. But there has been this notion that like one of my favorite posts was a friend saying something on LinkedIn about they say the AI can't hold your hand, but when was the last time your doctor held your hand? And so yes, humans are necessary and they add value, but realistically, where is that value, and how do we double down on that and really sort of make that valuable and important, and then automate what we can and use computational power? Where there is a lot of data availability, let's use the computational power and take advantage of that and do the most with it.
Yeah. So when you look into the future, what are you most excited about in this technology in healthcare?
Well, I'm excited about a lot of automation, making steps go away, not making me deal with chatbots instead of people along the way. That's one. So like, how can you automate scheduling interaction points and delivery of information to patients and clinicians to make things more efficient? I am really excited about, we talked about lightly on the services side. I think there is a lot of headroom when it comes to clinical development. AI discovery is certainly one where there's been a lot of investment to date. Now, a lot of those companies are maturing such that you're having compounds enter the clinic. And so we're starting to see, a lot of these AI-generated molecules actually go through clinical development, and we'll see how that plays out. Similarly, on the clinical development side, you have a lot of disparate systems in that IT chain that can be better connected. And there's a lot of opportunity to drive towards more value, whether that's through more focused trials around looking at an efficacy or safety signal, or faster trials through more advanced protocols being delivered in trial operations. So I think at the clin dev side, ton of room for opportunity, and that ultimately will lead to more and better therapies in the market.
I want to move now to a section where I'll give you a word and I'd love your reaction to it. The first one is leadership.
Leadership. My reactions to it, this is very open-ended, is it? I'll reflect on it's funny. I think leadership, your first assumption is more of a top-down leadership and guiding a group of people. I often found some of my best learnings were the people say managing upward, but it's not necessarily about the political questions for it. It's how do you take ownership over something you're guiding and create trust at cascading levels below and above you in an organization, such that you can move it along as quickly as possible. I think leadership really is about an ownership mindset, having empathy upward and downward of the rungs in your organization and beyond, in order to make sure that what you're owning actually gets to success.
The second one is health equity.
This is a very broad one. This is the third time this has come up today in my conversations. That health equity is of high importance right now for all stakeholders. I think one of the key things sticking out to me, though, is how closely it's linked to data. We can make a lot of calls around what needs to happen for changes in health that could drive changes in health equity, whether that's from an access perspective, whether it's from a trials perspective. But unless I have the visibility through data over where there are challenges and opportunities, and I'm able to make changes by accessing the individuals that are visible in that data. That doesn't necessarily mean in an identifiable way, but unless I can actually drive change, it's not possible. So I think there is a really close link between the technology systems and possible changes in health equity.
So the third one was actually data.
I want to double down on this point. We're all excited about it. It's really easy to forget how recent all this compute and storage is in the world, especially in healthcare. I mean, all of US providers are not yet on the cloud yet. I mean, it's still, there's still a lot of facts. And so we talk about it like it's all possible and it's like right around the corner. There's a lot of straight up work to do from an infrastructure perspective. Now to the cloud and compute, there's a lot of opportunity to move things to cloud, and to leverage a lot of the computational power that's coming online. And I'm excited about these Gen AI tools because they're just creating such sort of enthusiasm in the market for people to get on there and start experimenting. And interestingly, some of the things that people are doing, they're so excited about Gen AI, but really it's more traditional advanced analytics. It's not necessarily, true Gen AI at this point, but whatever it is, to get people motivated, I'm loving that there's just a lot more traction right now to move things to the cloud, get more experimental, and think about data as core to anything that we do in the sector of health tech.
Can I just double down on mixing both health equity? You talked also about diversity in clinical trials and data. So there's obviously data that we have available. Unfortunately, we know how's diversity in clinical trials, or the data that we have in healthcare that is many times inequitable, unequal. We don't have data for underrepresented group, etc. And then obviously, though, this is the data that is feeding in systems for us to be able to make decisions. But also those data are helping us see where we have issues for us to be able to address them as we are building current clinical trials. So I want to have your views about diversity, equity in healthcare using this data, or things we don't have, and we need to make sure that it's a conscious bias that we're looking at. And how to address that.
I mean, there's a lot of fragmentation, right? If you just think about, one system to the next and the way that they organize their data, let alone how accessible it might be, you might introduce bias purely in the friction it takes to actually connect to systems, and for no other reason, right? And so, on the plus side, it's a very hot area. Companies are investing in this, whether or not they have any direct ROI. They recognize this as a necessity right now, which is great. It is the connections to the underlying data infrastructure are huge. And I think that, similarly on the data infrastructure side, people that want to invest in that often struggle to prove their ROI. So to have this kind of marriage between the need for broader data infrastructure, the imperative on health equity, I think there's a way for these initiatives that seem distinct to actually push together. And you're also having a lot of conversation around sort of, especially on the clinical development side, on access to patients internationally too, which can support, goals for each of those threads too.
So the last word is spread love in organizations.
I'll come back. I mentioned the word empathy associated with leadership, but I think, in healthcare, that's obviously a critical one. We think about, how you are empathetic to patients, and certainly patient centricity is huge. I'd like to be possibly a bit more cynical on that and think about, empathy associated with all stakeholders, and, think about clinicians. We often think about their workflow. We think about the burdens placed in front of them. And we talked about the potential to automate away the clinical work that they do. But right now, data shows that half their day is spent entering information into their IT systems anyways. So I'm sure they'd love to automate that away. I'd love to consider sort of spread love and broadly empathy around what they're doing and to change the workflow. Because in my mind, unless we think about all stakeholders involved and how their worlds need to change. And that needs to go, like I said, well beyond just a patient-centric view. It has to consider all stakeholders to incentivize them to make their lives better. We're not going to see the clinical impact that we want to see.
I love that. Any final word of wisdom, Nate, for healthcare leaders around the world?
As I said earlier, build first. Just get out there, hands dirty. You're going to learn more by trying to do it than you will by, spending a year debating what to do. So I'm just a big proponent of, getting the technical team involved early and trying things, but always staying compliant. That's a key aspect to all that.
Thank you so much, Nate, for being with me today. I appreciate our discussion.
Yes, fantastic. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you all for listening to Spread Love in Organizations podcast. More episodes summarizing the MIT Sloan Healthcare and Bioinnovations Conference are available on SpreadLoveIO.com or your preferred streaming app. Follow Spread Love in Organizations wherever you listen to podcasts and spread the word around you to inspire others and amplify this movement our world so desperately needs.